if someone has never questioned democracy and if it functions or not, and now you have Traore and you compare him with countries that are apparently democratic nations, I mean, I think one could easily tell the difference. And then I think from there on, then you can ask yourself, is democracy really the answer to our problems?
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't even have been having this conversation because a lot of these things I thought were the word of God, basically. They're just, all these things have been settled, right? These are not questions to be debated right now. These are like, all of this is already settled.
Mm,
There's no reason to have any argument about this. And what I've learned over the past 3 to 4 years, especially, is that everything you think you know was put into your head by somebody, and that somebody always has an agenda that may or may not align with yours. So, in the case of this thing we call democracy, for example, on paper it sounds good. Hey, the people select their own leadership. People vote for a leader, so nobody can impose their will on the people because the people themselves get to choose. It sounds very, all nice and dandy. In reality, that's not how it works at all. Because the people are not choosing their leadership. So in an African context, you have 3, 4 people on the ballot paper at on election day. Who put those people on the ballot paper? Was it you? Because what you realize is that the actual leadership selection process doesn't take place in the public domain. So by the time you get to the point where there are these names on the ballot paper and you have to pick one of them, whether you pick one of
mm,
them or not, one of those names is going to become your head of state. One of those names is going to have power over your life, whether you like it or not, right? Before it gets to that point, who decided who those names are? And what you realize is that there's a whole hidden infrastructure behind the scenes that you and I do not have access to, where the real decisions are made. So, for example, if, say, the US government has an interest in this specific country, the US government would very much like to have influence over the government of this country. What do they do? What they do is, because these things are planned years in advance, they identify who the emerging young um, thought leadership minds are in that country. That could be entrepreneurship, that could be entertainment, that could be journalism and media, that could be civil society, that could be research and academia. They identify all the bright young people and then bring them into the fold. So that's where you get all your Yalis, your Mandela Washingtons, your IVLPs. And I mean, I was nominated for an IVLP in 2018 while I was working on TV in Nigeria, right? They identify, and again, to give you an idea of how successful this IVLP program is, it's estimated that up to 70% of people who have gone on to be heads of state and members of parliament and important political figures around the world have at some point been awarded an IVL. And this happened maybe decades before. So the current Indian head of state, for example, Narendra Modi, he was given an IVLP when I believe he was in his 30s, right? So these people they identify the future leaders of your country decades in advance, bring them into the fold, make them American aligned, right? Make friends with them and groom them. And then eventually, by the time maybe 30, 40 years down the line, when you're voting for these people on the ballot paper, you think you are making a choice. You're making a democratic choice. You're not. Because all the names on that list have been vetted. And all the names on that list were put there by powers that you have no control over and that are not visible to you. So basically, 85% of the story has already been told. And then you just join for the final 15%. And then you delude yourself into saying that, well, you've made a democratic choice. No, the fuck you haven't. And that's how a lot of what we describe as democracy in Africa, that's how it actually works. Why is it that the person who is the president of Nigeria, for example, why is he the president of Nigeria? He's the president of Nigeria because the US wanted him to be president of Nigeria. How did he get to that position in his political career, despite all the well publicized stuff hanging over him from his past? Right? This was someone who wasn't even supposed to even have made it to even the very first election he contested in, which was the senatorial election in 1991. Because at that, sorry, no, it's not 91. Sorry, this was 93. Right at this point, he should have already, because he had a criminal case in the U.S. He should have been done at that point. Like, you're associated with a criminal investigation into heroin trafficking, you're done. Politically, you're done. And instead, he wasn't convicted. And somehow, even some of the money which was actually seized from him, which was the court said this is proceeds of heroin trafficking, some of it was actually returned to him. And somehow, this guy was able to return to Nigeria, start up a very successful political career, become a governor, become a party leader, set up his own huge political infrastructure, become a kingmaker, and then ultimately become president. And what you find out is that every step of the way, and you don't have to take my word for it, you can go to WikiLeaks and literally just search this guy's name, right? This guy was always talking to the US embassy back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, constantly. It doesn't take a genius to work out what was happening here. They were basically guiding him through an entire simulated career, which they created for him, and they basically installed him into the presidency. But if you went and you voted on election day in 2023, and you say you voted for him or you voted for somebody else, you would think you're making an informed democratic decision. Again, no, the fuck you weren't. You weren't part of the game. You're just somebody whose role is to legitimize the actual decisions that have been taken by other people. So the people who make decisions in rooms that you and I don't have access to, they make decisions and they are written down and recorded in places you and I cannot access. And there's no amount of FOIA lawsuits that will give you access to those things. So they will say these are classified national secrets. They will remain classified for the next 75 years. That's how the world works, right? So democracy, is it actually democratic? The idea of democracy is great, fantastic. It's one of the greatest stories ever told. But has it ever really actually been the case that something is democratic, where especially where a large group of people is involved and there's a leadership decision being made, and the leadership decision has economic implications for large numbers of people, very powerful people? How is that democracy? That's just the reality, or that's even going very far. Let's drill it down to the most. We're not even talking about the president. We're talking about maybe like a council ward chairman or something at the local level. What determines whether you win that election or not is not how well you can communicate with the people and convince them of your ideas and your manifesto, your programs, the ideas for governance you have. What will make you win that election is, can you buy them rice? Can you buy their votes? Can you give them a free T-shirt? Yeah. Can you hire a big campaign van to go around playing loud music and people dancing? That's what actually wins the election.
And pay
So
artists to join in
exactly.
the rallies.
So that is no democracy. There's a lot of spectacle and pomp and pageantry involved in this thing, right? It's a big production, but it's not a democracy.
I think that's a very fascinating way to think about democracy. And I mean, if you look at China and the type of development they have had in what a span of less than half a decade, it makes you wonder. And I know there's a lot of things behind the scene, but then it makes you wonder, why can't we do what they have done, right? And I think the challenge is, most of the times when you see leaders who are actually doing that, they end up being assassinated.